Hello everyone, Undead Youth here, back again with another video. I know it's been a little while. I want to thank everyone, all my new subscribers and all my old ones for watching my videos and giving them likes and love and all that good stuff. But today we're going to embark on another journey. This is going to be a long one. We're going to talk about the Mistweaver Monk, which is, I think without a doubt, most people will agree, the healer with the highest skill cap of all, currently in Warlords of Draenor at least. And that is for a number of reasons. We're going to do what we always do when we talk about a class, is break it all the way down, talk about every single thing, and then piece it back together so we can come up with a play style that's going to suit us. And of course that means that this guy's going to be long, and it's going to be tailored more towards beginners who have questions about the spec, who are going to be doing things like LFR, 5-mans, Mythic 5-mans, and normal mode mostly until Legion drops, and just kind of want to get the chance to play their monk if they boosted it or they're switching over. So I hope you guys do get a lot out of this video, because that is my sole purpose. So without any further ado, if you want to play a Mistweaver Monk, why would you want to play a Mistweaver Monk as opposed to other healers? Well, Mistweavers are throughput healers, or raid healers as we call them. And their primary job is to spread HOTS around the raid and then to heal players up using things like Uplift and Rushing Jadewind. They're really good not only in spread situations because of how Uplift really, the only cap to Uplift is the amount of people that you can spread Renewing Mist on, which we'll talk about that in a second, but they're also extremely good in stack situations due to talents like Rushing Jadewind and Chi Burst. So they really are a very versatile class. They also don't have terrible tank healing, at least as far as throughput healers are concerned. It'll never be as good as spamming Clarity of Will on a tank, or keeping your beacons on a tank and passively healing them, but Soothing Mist is a powerful spell, and so is Enveloping Mist, as well as the ability to talent into a little bit more single target focused things like Zen Sphere if you wanted to. So monks are extremely adaptable, which they should be. So I think that if you really want to learn how to play a monk, you can be an asset to your raid no matter what the fight is. You just have to really know what you're doing. So that's kind of the purpose of this guide. So what makes monks different than other classes? Or what is the overall point of the class? You can really say that the overall point that permeates everything that we're going to talk about today is pretty much that you want to maximize a monk's usefulness or usability of the active mitigation mechanic, or not active mitigation, active mana regeneration mechanic, which is something that hasn't been seen in a really, really long time, at least since like MOP, which is basically pressing a button or doing an action to regenerate mana outside of your spirit on your gear passively. This has been done away with in most classes, Druids being like the big example that most people think about with their Innervate, because it led to a really boring playstyle where you spammed spells because you had to during the times where Innervate was going to come off cooldown, so that you would have, you know, enough of a free mana bar to get back when you used Innervate. And you could time that, and it basically just didn't amount to much fun gameplay because you're just spamming incorrect spells, then getting mana back, then spamming incorrect spells again, if you're even using it on yourself. So that was another not so fun thing. But they kind of redid it, and I personally think they got it right with monks, but Legion kind of shows that that might not be the case, or they're changing it, and that's okay too. But I think that they kind of have it right with us, whereas we have a separate sort of resource to manage for our mana regeneration that we have to build. And that mana regenerating resource is called Mana Tea. Surprising, right? We're a monk and we need mana, so yeah, right, Mana Tea. Okay. This ability, or this resource, stacks up to 20 times, and it's generated through spending chi, and then we consume it as a channeled ability and regenerate mana. So with that being said, I want you to kind of think about everything we do within the confines of, I'm trying to generate as much Mana Tea as efficiently as possible, because what Mana Tea is going to let you do, obviously, is run the fight longer. It's going to give you more of a effective mana bar than you actually have. Kind of how we talk about how absorbs give players more of an effective health bar than they already have. This kind of gives you a more effective mana bar, so it can let you elongate fights and last longer than other healers do. Or more importantly, monks kind of work in this kind of almost like a burn and conserve type thing, like the way that arcane mages work, where during the beginning of the fight you do everything you can to conserve mana and to generate mana T stacks. Then when the raid really needs it, you actually do pretty much follow the old druid playstyle of just going balls to the wall, crazy heals to keep the raid alive, because monk spells in general are not cheap. And then knowing that you have the opportunity, based on the fight and the damage patterns, to go back to a conserve phase where you can drink that mana tea and then continuously generate more stacks. So that's kind of how that works. Now, how do we generate mana tea? We talked about it. We have to spend chi. Now, what is chi is the next question you would ask, right? Chi is a monk-only resource. The best thing I can kind of compare it to for healers is holy power. It's a 4-charge resource system that we generate through using abilities that cost mana. And so that kind of forms the basis of our strategy. We want to generate mana tea, we need chi. We want to generate chi, we need mana. And mana tea gives us back mana. So it lets us do it all over again. And this is the overarching point of the spec, is to try to keep that cycle going as much as you can. This forces us to be efficient all the way through. It doesn't really give us the opportunity to mess up, because we'll generate one less resource of one of those things, and that's not good because it affects the entire cycle. So that's kind of what we're focusing on right now. Now, let's start at the beginning. Now that we've worked our way backwards and gone forwards, we're going to start forwards and go backwards, I guess. Yeah. We're going to start with what abilities that cost us mana generate chi. There really aren't a lot. The most important one is Renewing Mist, which is a hot that is very, very unique in the sense that it's kind of like a priest's prayer of mending. When you place it on a target and they take damage, it just go ahead, well, they don't even have to take damage actually. When it ticks, it will be placed on the target with 3 charges, and then when it ticks, it will jump to another target. And then it will have 1 less stack when it does, and then it will jump to another target and starts with 3 and ends at 1. This is a really nice ability for blanketing the raid on hots. And it gives us 1 chi whenever we cast it. It's pretty much going to be used on cooldown, even if it's going to overheal, because the actual hot itself heals for very, very little. So you pretty much just want to use this on cooldown for the chi that it generates. Then you have Expel Harm. Expel Harm is a kind of so-so self-heal that can be glyphed to be a targeted really bad heal for other people, so I usually don't glyph it, but we'll talk about glyphs later. You pretty much want to use this on cooldown also for the 1 chi that it generates. You want to be correct, I guess, and say that if you're at full health you don't want to Expel Harm, but again, the heal is not that strong even on yourself, but the chi is very, very important, so you're probably just going to use it on cooldown. The last way that you generate chi is an ability called Spinning Crane Kick, which, if we are in Serpent stance, which we have 2 stances as a Mistweaver monk, and this is the stance that I want you to assume that you're going to be in for the first part of this video, which is just your normal healing stance. When you're in this stance, as opposed to how other classes like or other specs like the Brewmaster and the Windwalker use their Spinning Crane Kick, where it's an AoE that damages things, it's an AoE that heals things. So it heals everyone within the circle or the animation of Spinning Crane Kick for a pretty decent amount, but it's a very expensive spell. It's kind of like a Druid's Wild Growth. And so you can see that this is a spell that we're going to use when we know we have some mana tea to back it up. However, it generates us 1 chi if it heals 3 people. So it's going to be one of those, are there going to be enough people near me that need the healing that are going to get the healing for the full duration while I'm channeling this? Because it's a channeled spell, so you can't do anything else while you're doing it. So just bear that in mind, and it's your last ditch resort to generating chi. And honestly, if you're using it in an instance where it's not going to generate you chi, you should not be doing it. That's also a really good way to think about it as well, because it costs so much mana. If it's healing less than 3 people, it's not worth it. So there's that. So those are all the ways to generate chi. Now we need to talk about ways to spend chi, and then we need to talk about how that translates into mana tea. Now we only have 2 ways to spend chi, so it gets a little less complicated here. We have probably the most important one for raiders, which is Uplift. Uplift is an ability that heals everybody that has Renewing Mist on them for a pretty small amount. But this could be an incredibly potent ability for a bunch of different reasons. Like I said, it's totally tied to Renewing Mist, but it can potentially heal a lot more players than something like Wild Growth or Circle of Healing, which is comparable to other throughput healers' big AoE spells. It has a much higher cap on the number of players it can heal, even though it doesn't heal for as much. Right? Not only that, it doesn't suffer from things like line of sight issues or range issues because it simply, I want you to think of it as almost detonates the renewing mist that you have on your targets, but it doesn't detonate them because they still exist. But it's more of a trigger to instantly heal those guys. So it's a very versatile spell. It costs us 2 chi to use. So you're going to have to make sure that you have enough chi to use it and some renewing mist out in order to actually get the people that you need to heal healed. And that's why it's so important to use renewing mist on cooldown 100% of the time. Okay. Your only other way of spending chi for a single target, so if you're a tank healer or if you're doing a lot of 5-man content, is Enveloping Mist. Enveloping Mist is an ability that is just really a really strong hot. It costs you 3 chi, but it's an incredibly strong hot that increases further the healing done by your other spells on it, or one of your other spells on your target. And we'll talk about the other spell in a second. But this is obviously something that can be used on a single target, mostly your tanks that are going to be continuing to receive healing from you. But it is a really powerful hot. It can heal me up from like almost nothing to full very, very quickly. I don't have a ton of health, but it shows you that on anything that's not a tank, it's pretty much going to heal them up almost instantly. It does tick very fast as well because it has a very short duration. So definitely use this when single targets are taking damage and they need it. So that's pretty much how you generate chi and how you spend chi. But how does that translate into mana T? Well, for every 4 chi that you consume, you generate 1 charge of mana T. Okay? And you have a chance equal to your critical strike chance as a Mistweaver monk to generate 2 mana T stacks whenever you generate 1. So just bear that in mind. The higher your crit chances and any buffs you take into account that increase your crit chance, like raid buffs and other passives that we'll talk about later that we have, will also increase your mana T generation. So that's kind of how that cycle works. But we've talked about all the spells that live inside that cycle. And honestly, even if you just took those spells, your class would probably be boring, but it would probably be in line with what other Warlords or Draenor classes are right now. Some of them are really simple, like Disc Priest. And you pretty much would have a Disc Priest right there, but we have a ton more stuff to talk about. So if that was a lot for you to digest, you might want to pause now because we're going to keep going. We have to talk about all of our other healing spells that don't generate chi, but do have some synergies with the other things that we're doing. And the most important one of which is Soothing Mists. Soothing Mist is a channel ability that we can cast on a player. And it allows us to do a bunch of different things, but first and foremost, it doesn't cost you any mana to cast, but it costs you mana per second that it's channeled, but it's very, very cheap. It is your heal that if all other things don't make sense, like I could drink mana tea but I'm at full mana, or I could use Renewing Mist / Uplift, but there's nobody in the raid that needs healing, or even I don't need to do a ton of healing on a single target, so I don't need to use Enveloping Mist. Soothing Mist is your go-to, and it should always be, like, if nothing else, you should always be channeling Soothing Mist on someone. You'll find that once you get into higher gear levels, for reasons we'll talk about, you don't really have the option to as much, but you still definitely should be if there's a lull in your rotation for whatever reason. And right now you can see that it's pretty much entirely dependent on how many Renewing Mists you can shoot out at a time, because that's also what ties your uplifts together and really overall controls how much chi you generate in a fight. So if you don't have a lot of that, you're going to be doing a lot more Soothing Mist spam than you will if you have a lot of Renewing Mists going on. We'll talk about how to get more later. So Soothing Mist is important. It's also a facilitator for some of your other abilities. The first one being Enveloping Mist that we talked about before. Normally Enveloping Mist has a cast time, which is relatively short, but if you're channeling Soothing Mist, it will attempt, when you press Enveloping Mist while casting Soothing Mists, it will be instant cast, which is awesome. If it's coming down to a life-saving heal, you want it to be instant cast. So just remember, whenever you're healing in a 5-man, you're going to get a ton of practice at this because it's pretty much like your only way of healing reliably in a 5-man. Soothing Mist, then Enveloping Mist. Never just use Enveloping Mist by itself. And remember when I said that Enveloping Mist increases the potency of one of our spells, it's Soothing Mist. So if the hot Enveloping Mist is on your target, your Soothing Mist will actually heal that target for way more. So even more reason to make sure that you're doing it the right way, which is to have Soothing Mist channeled and then funnel your Enveloping Mist to that target while that channel is going on instantly. The other spell that it helps facilitate is a spell called Surging Mist, which is our next ability. And I guess we could have also covered this under chi generators, but it's kind of a borderline thing that it's only for emergency chi. What Surging Mist is kind of like our Flash Heal, and it does generate as 1 chi, but it costs a pretty big chunk of mana. Almost like spinning Crane Kick, but on a single target. I still look at it more as an emergency heal than a chi generator, but that's just because I'm coming over from playing other classes. It is definitely something that you're going to have to cast at times to get chi to do things. Specifically more often in single target scenarios and 5-mans than you will in raids. But this spell also, when channeled via Soothing Mist, is instant. So that's something very, very important to note. So if you really need to heal up a single target very quickly, you can already see a rotation forming excuse me, of Soothing Mist, and then Surging Mist, and then Enveloping Mist. When you have enough chi being the Surging Mists. All the while making sure you're keeping things like a Spell Harm and Renewing Mist on cooldown, and you'll very easily have the chi to do so. So that's a really, really important ability to remember. Also, we can talk a bit about our mastery right now. Our mastery is Gift of the Serpent, which drops healing spheres when we heal various targets, and these spheres can be walked through by other players to heal them, and they will also detonate after a certain amount of time. Also, we have a spell that will manually detonate them and heal players nearby. We would like for players to run over these spheres themselves, because detonate chi does cost mana and a global cooldown. So we'd rather them just take the free healing, but so few people actually do. It's something to remember that you have. It's a very unreliable form of healing, as it is RNG in 1, how it's generated, 2, where it goes, because you can't really control that, and if the person's going to take advantage of it. So it's not something that you rely on a lot, but it's definitely there, and there are some healing strategies with the monk that do take more account for it than others. You also have Detox, which is just your standard, you have a magical debuff or poison on you, and I'm going to heal you. Very standard stuff there. Other than that, you pretty much don't have a lot of other abilities. Let's talk about cooldowns basically right now. Built into your spec, you really only have 1 major cooldown, or 2. You have Revival, which is like your big AoE raid cooldown, which just instantly heals the raid up a huge amount and clears all poison and disease effects, which is great. Then you also have Life Cocoon, which is your single target big absorb on a target, which also increases your periodic heal into them. And what's really nice is that even though Soothing Mist is a targeted heal, it is still considered a periodic heal because it's channeled, so its ability is increased, as well as Renewing Mist, right? So that's really good as well. So now we kind of talked about our base toolkit, which is a lot, and we still haven't talked about our other stance or talents yet. So, again, I recommend that if this is a lot for you, just kind of take a step back and sort of fiddle around with those abilities, how to generate chi, how to spend it, and then how to, use your mana tea. You can always start thinking about fights from the perspective of a Mistweaver. Every healer looks at a fight differently. Priests are all about getting ahead of the damage. Monks are all about finding those moments where they can drink mana tea without being disturbed as much as possible, and generate it cheaply as much as possible, and when they're going to have to be using a lot of their abilities very, very quickly. So that's how you want to map out your fights as a monk. And we'll get more into that later. But now we're going to build upon things even further when we're going to talk about talents. Okay? Your level 15 talents are a movement speed tier. You have Celerity, which just gives your roll 3 charges. Then you have Tiger's Lust, which gives you a 50% movement speed increase and releases you from all like snares and movement impairing effects. And then you have Momentum, which gives you a small movement speed increase every time you roll. So all of these are good for different things. Momentum is just a basic good, I need to get from point A to point B type of ability. It's definitely something that I don't feel like I would ever use because Tiger's Lust is very similar in that regard, but it doesn't require you to cast a spell because Tiger's Lust is still a spell. So in instances where you are silenced, which would be weird, I don't think that Tiger's Lust will work. And in general, I don't like the fact that it's tied to roll, and roll is a fixed distance. But if you need to travel large distances more frequently than the cooldown on Tiger's Lust, you're probably going to be using Momentum. Tiger's Lust is awesome, and it's usually the default pick, unless you've taken any other synergistic talents later on in the tree. And that's purely because not only can it be cast on you, but it can be cast on other people as well. So if somebody needs to get out of the raid for Heartseeker, if a tank needs to get out of the raid for Artillery, you can give them a speed boost, which is awesome. And then finally you have Celerity, which gives you 3 charges of roll, which much like Momentum, and it also, I believe, reduces the cooldown of your roll as well, which much like Momentum lets you travel very, very large distances very quickly. But its biggest use is, of course, that it synergizes with your other talents that augment your roll, like Chi Torpedo, which we'll talk about later. So it's really the go-to when you pick that, and not usually taken if you haven't picked Chi Torpedo. So next, level 30 is some sort of hybrid damage dealing and healing ability. You have Chi Wave, which basically just sends out a Chi Bolt that bounces between enemies and allies, healing allies and dealing damage to enemies. Then you have Zen Sphere, which is a hot that you can place on a target that will also do damage to enemies. And then when that hot expires, or when that target is put below 35% health, that Zen Sphere will detonate and it will heal the target and everyone around them. And then finally you have Chi Burst, which is just like this huge Kamehameha outward from you, which heals for a pretty decent amount, and it's really good on stacked fights. Okay, it's kind of like a shotgun blast of goodness to the face. So let's start by talking about Chi Wave. Chi Wave is okay. It's usually used in 5-mans where the cap is not as big of a deal. It's just a nice ability to use to get a nice jolt of healing. It doesn't have a lot of special management or requirement that the other 2 abilities need to be able to use optimally. So if you are new to the class, or you're doing content where you don't have a ton of people and they're not going to be stacked for whatever reason, then the 2 other talents lose a lot of their luster, and then Chi Wave becomes about the only choice. Though I will say that there are certain times where you would use the others in 5-man environments as well. Then you have Zen Sphere. Zen Sphere is one that I personally like because it gives you another hot to place on a tank or single targets, which we don't have a lot of instant cast spells as monks, which you'll figure out very quickly. But also, I like to put it on myself when I'm in melee, and we'll talk about why you'd be in melee later. And I know I'm always going to be able to heal a bunch of people with the detonate effect. The thing you need to realize is that it takes a lot, and I mean a lot, of management to make good use out of Zen Sphere. You need to always be thinking, is it better to let the hot run on the target, or is it better to let it expire? It's usually better to let it expire, but if it's going to overheal, then it's not. Right? You also need to realize that because of the duration versus the cooldown of Zen Sphere, you can have 2 up at the same time. So if it's better to let that expire, you should always make sure that you have 2, so that you always have 1 rolling after that last one expires. So that's another really important thing about Zen Sphere to keep in mind. Personally, I like it, and I use it a lot in 5-man environments for the extra hot on the tank, but I also use it a lot in like LFRs and raids and things because I'm going to be doing a lot of fist weaving and I'm in melee. But during harder content, you're not going to be fist weaving as much, so that becomes a little less relevant. And then finally, you have Chi Burst. Chi Burst is this massive Kamehameha wave, like I said. Important things to note here is that it is directed from whatever you're facing. It's not a targeted ability like the other 2 abilities are. And it heals in a very small radius, but it heals a lot in that radius. So it's really, really good on stacked fights. Remember, we talked a lot about stacking being very, very good for Mistweavers, and this is a primary example of that. And there are a lot of fights in HFC where stacking is mandatory. Think something like Feast of Souls. Think something like the certain strats where you move as a group on Iskar. Think before or during the second phase on Archimond. There are a ton of reasons why you would be stacked in HFC. Almost every fight requires you to be at some point in time. Think the hands on Chrome Rock. You can actually do a ton of damage to the hands because his ability does damage too. But in any fight where you're not stacked, Chi Burst is a little less useful, and in 5-mans I don't find it too useful because there's only 5 people, right? So that's kind of that. Pick whichever one you want. Then in level 45, you have some sort of augmentation to how you generate your Chi, which is also, of course, going to affect how we generate Mana Tea, which will also affect how we regenerate mana. So it's very important here. You have Power Strikes, which gives your abilities every few seconds. Your Chi generating abilities, which are Expel Harm, Surging Mist, Spinning Crane Kick, and Renewing Mist. They will generate you an additional Chi. Okay. Also, when you've taken Power Strikes, because of this ability, if you generate Chi when you already have 4 Chi, you will generate a Chi Sphere next to you that you can pick up like a healing sphere, but it's a Chi Sphere, and it will give you 1 Chi. Then you have Ascension, which just gives you the ability to hold on to 5 Chi instead of 4 by default, and it will increase your spirit, so it increases your mana regeneration baseline. And then you have Chi Brew, which gives you 2 charges of an ability called Chi Brew. When you consume these charges, it gives you Mana Tea, 1 stack, I believe it is, and then it also gives you 2 Chi automatically. So this is interesting as well. We'll start with Chi Brew. Reasons why you would take Chi Brew. If you are needing a lot of burst healing, Chi Brew can be very potent there because it gives you the ability, it just gives you the Chi for an uplift right then and there, which is very, very good. And if you're having like a sloppier rotation because you're having less renewing mists out and you're having trouble generating Chi, then this can be really nice to sort of pad out the moments in between. Also, it does give you Mana Tea directly, which is good. Like, that's what we talked about, right? Like, we want that, and that's good too. It does also require you to manage it a little bit more, which, I mean, at this point in time, there's so much managing going on. We haven't even really scratched the surface of it, but it does give you yet another thing to manage. You don't want to sit at 2 charges of Chi Brew very often because you're missing out on generating the 3rd charge. So you want to make sure that you're using one fairly often, but you also have one when you really need it. So kind of bear that in mind. But it is a good choice. It's not my personal choice, but it's definitely a good one. Then you have Ascension, which is generally not taken because the ability to hold 5 Chi is not really relevant because you don't really need to bank Chi as much. You're really using your Chi pretty much as soon as you can get it if you're not taking something like Chi Explosion, which we'll talk about later. But even if you are, it's still not that relevant. And also because of the ability for players that take Power Strikes to have Chi Spheres, it kind of makes the whole ability to store the 5th Chi irrelevant for Ascension. Also, that Spirit bonus, while it seems nice off the top, you know, and it seems like, hey, if I'm a beginner, I want this because I don't have a lot of like stuff on my gear, but it's really negligible. And of course, like, if you can just generate more Chi from the other 2 abilities, which the other 2 abilities do let you generate more Chi, right? Ascension doesn't really let you do that. Then you're going to be generating more Mana Tea if you're playing your class correctly, and you're going to be having more mana back anyway, so the Spirit is redundant. So it's more or less a redundant talent because of other things going on. Then you have Power Strikes. Power Strikes will give you the most fluid amount of Chi over the course of the fight, which I personally like. It makes your rotation a lot smoother, just the extra Chi. Some players feel like it's hard to plan for. There are add-ons that let you do that, but I would highly suggest not complicating your life with those. You don't really need them. Just enjoy the extra Chi. You don't have to worry about capping the resource, which is the worst part because of its ability to give you the Chi Sphere, which is another thing that I really like, and another reason why I would actually suggest it to beginners more than anything else, because of the fact that it just it doesn't punish you for capping your Chi, which theoretically you should be. And it, again, doesn't really require much management. The Chi comes when it comes, and you just sort of enjoy a smoother playstyle. But if you do want to micromanage, or if you do need burst healing, then you're definitely going to want to go for Chi Brew. Then we have level 60, which is a CC tier. The only thing you need to know is that Leg Sweep is the one that's generally taken for raiding. Also, if you're doing any sort of really difficult content, because it is a knockdown, so it is an interrupt. It is a big AoE interrupt, which is really, really, really good actually in like mythics and challenge modes, but also for like fucking annoying ads like imps and things like that in various Hellfire Citadel encounters, right? Manaroth, cough, cough. So, level 75 is some sort of like cooldown for survival. You have healing elixirs, which when you fall below 35% health will heal you up. Also, whenever you drink a tea or a brew with an internal cooldown, this ability is generally just not taken because you can heal yourself. It doesn't reduce the amount of damage that you take. So if something were just to be absolutely catastrophic and just pretty much nuke the shit out of you, you're still not going to survive. It's not that great of an ability. Then you have Dampen Harm. So Dampen Harm basically gives you like a protection against the next 3 physical attacks that would drop you below a certain amount of health. While this is nice, you simply don't take a ton of physical damage. I mean, you're a healer. You will be in melee more than other healers, but even then, things don't target you physically very often. And then if they do, something's probably gone wrong, which makes it really hard to plan for to get the most out of Dampen Harm. The general go-to choice is Diffuse Magic, which just reduces your magical damage taken, which is great. It can be used against things like Fell Hellstorm, Lure of Flames, Death Throws, everything. Everything that's going to kill you in HFC is magical, which is weird because they're like, coming over from playing a tank, that's not the case. But definitely for a healer, everything that's going to kill you is magical, so Diffuse Magic is the go-to. Then we have some sort of big, crazy, like, huge healing thing. In level 90, we have Rushing Jade Wind, which replaces your Spinning Crane Kick to basically be an aura around you that either does damage or healing depending on the stance that you're in. You have Invoke Zuin, which summons the White Tiger Zuin to attack enemies. While your Zuin is fighting, it will have what's called the Eminence passive. And what this means is when it does damage, it will also heal other players. It will send out a smart heal to other players per that damage, whichever person that the game feels like needs that heal the most. And then also important to note that in things other than raids, it will also taunt mobs as well. Chi Torpedo, which replaces roll, and it basically turns it into something that rolls farther, and it will do damage and healing to all targets that you roll through. And this is completely free. So let's start by talking about Chi Torpedo. Chi Torpedo is definitely the one that you want to go for if you are new to the class, if you want to have some fun, because it's hilarious fun. And you don't have like a lot of spirit or mana to work with, or you're unsure about how to generate mana efficiently. The reason being obviously because it's free, and it does do a lot of healing. Like it can crit like for 30k a tick on one person, which is pretty decent, and it can probably do more healing than like Rushing Jade Wind would if you use all 3 charges immediately. The issue with this, of course, is that it's a fixed distance. I just said 3 charges, so that means that you should definitely be taking celerity with this. We talked about that earlier, but you should definitely be taking celerity. And it does require 3 globals of you doing nothing but rolling through people. But it can be useful, and it's really, really good in stacked situations. So think, again, Feast of Souls, so on and so forth. You can just roll straight through the group and back. You can even do things like, if that's what you're going to be doing, you can even go out there and soak the spirits that come towards the group in Gorefiend. You can be really, really effective at that, comboing it with the diffuse magic that we just talked about, and then you can do a ton of healing while doing that. It's crazy. Like, no other healer can say that, and it's totally free. So it's awesome. But generally speaking, it's not as much healing output as the other spells, as easily as the other spells, but it can be worth it, especially if you, like I said, want to have fun or you are having mana problems. Then we move on to Zuin. Zuin's interesting. Zuin does not do enough healing on its own on single target encounters, but there are very few single target encounters in HFC right now. He actually has an ability, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but this ability cleaves, so it does damage to all targets around him. And it does way more healing if you can do that. If you can get Zuin to cleave things, it can be worth it in the fight. And if you need the extra damage from Zuin, it can be worth it to take it. Those are really the only two reasons why you would take Zuin, though. It's okay while leveling as well. But typically speaking, it's pretty much going to come down to, do you really need the damage on these other ads, and can Zuweave, really? Zuweave? Like, now I'm thinking like blue hair. Oh god. Alright, Zuin can cleave other targets, and that will actually be necessary to the encounter, not just padding on the healing meters, because that's bad. So then finally, you have Rushing Jade Wind. Rushing Jade Wind is infinitely better than Spinning Crane Kick because it's not a channeled ability, which means you can do other things and heal other people while you're using it. And it heals for a shit ton, but it costs, and you guys, if you've watched my channel, you know what's coming. It costs a metric shit ton, not even a standard shit ton of mana, but a metric fucking shit ton of mana. It really does. It is literally the most expensive heal in the game. It costs more than Wild Growth. It costs more than Circle. It costs more than all of that shit. It is really fucking expensive, but it does a ton of healing. So you really, really have to be cognizant of where you are, who's around you, and who needs that healing. That is up to you. It's great in those stacked phases, but other than that, throughout the fight, you're really going to have to be cognizant of it. What's really cool that I do like about it, that not a lot of people give it credit for, is the ability to heal on the move. Pretty much all these talents have that, more or less, because you can move while Zuin does his thing, and obviously Chi Torpedo is healing while moving. But you can also heal while moving and Rushing Jade Wind. You can Rushing Jade Wind and roll if you wanted to. And that can be really, really important during things like Iskar, running for Allure of Flames, all those things. And it's actually really important. It's not a lot of other healers have that ability. We're kind of mobile like that, if you guys couldn't tell. Then level 100, you have Breath of the Serpent. I always want to say Breath of Sindragosa, stealing shit from DKs, god damn it. Then you have Chi Explosion, and you have Pool of Mist. These guys all pretty much deserve their own separate fucking videos. I'm going to keep it short. Breath of the Serpent, never taken. It basically shoots out a heal from your Jade statue, which is an ability that we have to drop down a statue anywhere that we are, that will replicate our Soothing Mist onto a target. Normally, it pretty much only reacts with Soothing Mist, normally in Serpent Stance at least. But it gives it another functionality if you take this talent, which is Breath of the Serpent, which it just sprays healing out. It's so fucking cool looking. It really is, but it is useless because it's entirely dependent on where that statue is. So that placement has to be there. Where everybody else is, they still have to be stacked yet again, just like all of your other abilities, which again isn't impossible, but it's really hard because of all the stipulations done to this ability. It's hard to make it better than the other ones in the tier. It's not that it's completely useless on its own. If it were in any other tier, it might be the pick, but the other ones are just better. Then we have Chi Explosion, which replaces Blackout Kick, which is an ability we haven't talked about yet. But for the purpose of this, you just need to know that Chi Explosion does different things depending on how much Chi you have. You're pretty much going to be using it at 4 Chi exclusively. There is no reason to think about using it at anything other than 4 Chi when you're in Serpent Stance. When you're in Serpent Stance and you're using it at 4 Chi, it's going to heal everyone around your target, and it's going to generate healing spheres around the target, which is really important because that on-demand controlled location of healing spheres solves a lot of the problems we were talking about with your healing spheres. And if you've taken Chi Explosion, I would highly suggest paying a lot more attention to Detonate Chi, because it will be a lot more relevant for you. Typically speaking, I use this in 5-mans because it's the best choice. The other two are so AoE oriented that they really don't make much sense. Other than that, it's pretty good when you're fist weaving, which we'll talk about later. But definitely, and also important to note is that if you're channeling Soothing Mist on your target and you Chi Explosion, it will be instant, as it would normally have a cast time without that. So, again, Soothing Mist, cast it. Just make a commercial. Soothing Mist, cast it. Okay. Then you have Pool of Mist, which is the default rating choice, which is basically your Renewing Mist and your Rising Sun Kick, another ability that we haven't talked about yet, that I always want to call Rising Sun Kissed, have 3 charges instead of 1. This is obviously very, very, very good because it lets us blanket the raid in more renewing mist, and it gives us more chi. I mean, just on that merit alone, it is infinitely by far the better choice between the other two, hands down. Because we talked about this, the concept that permeates everything that we're going to do is how efficiently can we generate our mana tea, and this helps us do it because it gives us more chi, and that gives us more mana tea, and that's what we need. But it also lets Uplift have more potential targets. This is how Uplift can easily out-heal the other big AoE heal abilities that other healers have, because you can instantly start to get way more targets than those other abilities can. And this means that you're going to have to pay a little less attention to your Renewing Mist, but still, you're also going to get it kind of flowing around the raid a lot more, so you want to be careful not to overwrite it on cast it on a target that already has it, especially at high stacks. But this is by far the go-to rating, 100%. There is no choice. And then, like I said, it's kind of up to you how you want to go about using your 5-man talents. They could all be, well, no, they really can't. Like, the extra charges on Renewing Mist don't really matter. It's pretty much, I think, Chi Explosion is the only option. Now, let's move on really quickly to glyphs, because I wanted to talk about those really quick. Not a lot of glyphs really matter. The most mandatory one I find is Renewing Mists, which just gives your Renewing Mist a bigger radius to do its thing, which is very important because that's more uplift targets. That's essentially like also increasing the radius of uplift, right? So that's awesome. Then you have Glyph of Targeted Expulsion, which, like I said, can turn your Expel Harm into a heal that you can use on other people, but it reduces its effectiveness. I don't like this because it's just not enough. I'd rather just keep it as the self-heal that it is, and it will do more for me. But it's up to you. It is completely up to you, but it's not going to save anyone's life. It's really not. And the Glyph of Soothing Mist means that causes you to gaining movement speed buff whenever you stop channeling Soothing Mist, which is pretty cool because you're going to be doing a lot of Soothing Mist and you're going to be standing still. Like in 5-mans where people are constantly moving, it's so tiresome to keep up with people while you're having to sit still and cast on them, and they don't realize that. And monks have been out for 2 expansions. I don't know how you don't know that. So it can be nice for keeping up with the rest of the group, or being able to move on the fly if something's targeting you and you're busy doing your single target thing in a raid. So it's more or less mandatory. Or you can also take one of the 2 detox glyphs. One gives you 2 charges of detox. The other one applies a healing component to detox, which can be obviously relevant when there is stuff to cleanse. I use the one that adds the heal in 5-mans, right? Other than that, those are pretty much your glyphs. Now, we've talked about a ton of things, and just to kind of recap what we've talked about so far, we talked about the fact that we're going to be doing most of our healing in Serpent Stance. We're going to be keeping Renewing Mist on cooldown. We're going to keep our Jade Statue down as much as we possibly can. It has a very, very short cooldown, but a very, very long, 15-minute duration. It's really long. You're going to be keeping both of those down on cooldown. You're going to be using your, whatever your level, 30 talent is, whether it's Chi Wave, Zen Sphere, or Chi Burst, pretty much on cooldown, giving considerations to when they're better or worse. And then you're going to be using Expel Harm on cooldown to generate your Chi. You're going to be using Uplift when a bunch of people need healing that also have your Renewing Mist on them. Really important to note, Uplift does not heal anyone that does not have Renewing Mist on them. So if you're unlucky with your Renewing Mist and they don't hit the right targets, don't cast Uplift because it's not going to heal those other people. And that sucks, but that's just the way that it is. And then you're going to be using Enveloping Mist when only one person needs to be healed. All the while, you're going to make sure that you're going to be casting Soothing Mist when nothing else makes sense, and definitely before you use an ability like Searching Mist, Chi Explosion, or Enveloping Mist. If your target is about to die and it's a single target, you're going to pop Life Cocoon on them. If your raid is about to die, you're going to be using Revival. If your raid leader doesn't tell you to use it at another point in time. Other than that, in AoE situations that get really, really bad, you're going to be using Spinning Crank Kick or Rushing Jade when there are 3 people or more within the animation that will stay in the animation. Very, very important. Now, we've been going on for 44 minutes. a lot of you guys will know that there's a completely separate thing that we need to talk about how Mistweavers generate mana tea and do damage. That's called fist weaving. I don't have enough time to go into it in this much detail as we've gone into everything else in this guide. So I'm going to make a separate guide to that. That's going to come up very, very shortly after this. But take all that we've discussed here, digest it, hop into a 5-man, hop into an LFR, see how things change, play with your talents, because a lot of them are situational and a lot of them can be good in different players' hands. Figure out what you like. Take it all with a grain of salt, and then come back and watch the fist weaving video, and we'll recap all of this and put it all together. Thank you guys so much for watching.